let's discuss if getting rid of Dave Hakstol is going to immediately solve all of the Seattle Kraken's problems on today's episode of Locked On Kraken.
You are Locked On Kraken, your daily podcast on the Seattle Kraken, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what do you say, Seattle hockey fans? Welcome to another episode of Locked On Kraken, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where we bring you your favorite team every single day. My name, if we're meeting for the first time, is Erica L. Ayala. Been the host of Locked On Kraken since the very beginning, bringing you to the expansion draft, and most recently, as of yesterday, with our breaking news that our first ever head coach, Dave Hakstol, has been dismissed. We are going to talk about a lot of things, including maybe some conflicting reports, and of course, who could be next up. But first, I want to let you know today's episode of Locked On Kraken brought to you by our friends at Monopoly Go. Now, if you, like me, are competitive, then you will be a big fan of Monopoly Go. It is a mobile twist on the classic Monopoly. Join your friends and download Monopoly Go, which is now free on the Apple Store and Google Play. We're not playing around when it comes to coaching. At least that's the message that was sent when the Seattle Kraken let go of not just head coach Dave Hakstol, but also one of their assistants, Paul McFarland. Our defensive assistant and our goaltending coach are still a part of the team, at least as of right now. I'm going to let defense alone for now. But we definitely have to do a deeper dive into this decision. Now, if you listened to yesterday's episode, well, that had nothing to do with Dave Hakstol because the news was breaking as I was recording. But I did do a bonus episode and I read the statement since we've heard from Ron Francis. He spoke yesterday after I recorded the breaking news, the bonus segment, and gave you my thoughts, where I said basically what I've been saying since last offseason, that if we wanted to go in the direction of a coaching change, I could definitely see that. And for me, the larger questions looming, especially between last season, where we made it to the second round of the Stanley Cup playoffs, and this season, where we got eliminated and we're short by about 17 points, was what I would consider some front office issues. I don't know how we went into season 3 thinking that we could have the same productivity. And I went through last offseason. We went through line for line. Pierre-Edouard Bellemare versus, Daniel Sprong, Kyler Yamamoto versus Morgan Geekie, and on, and just didn't understand where we thought all of this offense was going to come from. Oh, right. That's right. I'm sorry. Andre Burakovsky was supposed to be healthy. We had a lot of injuries. There was a mysterious illness. Philip Grubauer went down again, but again, I've said it. Dave has said it. The players have said it. You can't use the injuries as an excuse. And I don't want to make any excuses for Dave Hakstol because I think there were a lot of times where even I, who was more leaning toward this being a front office issue, I've told you right here on the show, everydayers, OGers, and our insiders, you know this for sure. We're getting dangerously close to a point where there's a point of no return, and where, whether it's his fault or not, air quotes, it is his fault. You're the head coach. You got to make some things happen. Now, between the time that we got the report and Ron Francis spoke to media yesterday afternoon, Central Time, so early afternoon, I guess, Pacific Time, there was a report last night, because we had NHL games last night, from Emily Kaplan saying two things that I thought were interesting. The first one saying that reports from that Emily Kaplan has been receiving that Ron Francis didn't want to make this move, The second thing that Emily Kaplan reported on is that there were some very influential, kind of important players that perhaps were calling for the removal of Dave Hakstol, and even further, that they wouldn't play for the Seattle Kraken if Dave wasn't removed. Very interesting developments. Let's hear from um, Ron Francis from yesterday's media availability, and then I want to break a few things down. So remember, Emily Kaplan reporting Ron Francis didn't want to make this move, but apparently some of the players did. We're going to hear from Ron Francis and also from Vince Dunn, because again, the reporting just seems to be inconsistent at best. And honestly, I think everything is up for debate and on the table, but the way things are kind of coming together leave me with more questions than answers. That's how I feel. But speaking of questions or comments, later in the show, I also want to get to some of the comments that y'all have put on YouTube in the Locked On Kraken comments, because I think some of them are really, really interesting and echo how I feel about the situation. But first, let's hear from Ron Francis from yesterday's media availability. If you want to watch the full media availability, go over to Locked On Kraken on our YouTube page. You can listen for yourself the questions and the answers that Ron was given. But for now, this is a splice of a few of Ron's comments from yesterday.
It's never an easy day. It's never an easy decision. We let a guy who's a good coach and a really good person go, and it's it's not easy. But just looking at the season, I thought we were a little more inconsistent than we had been. Few too many losing streaks of significant numbers, and so I just felt it was time to try a new voice here. Probably make a case, right, with the amount of injuries and stuff we had. We had some guys that had off seasons. We had guys that missed a lot of time. So there was a lot of challenges to the roster as well. And it doesn't mean that we're not going to look to do things in the summer. We said that before. We have to make some changes to the roster and try and get back to where we want to get to next season for sure. I think you're careful in exit interviews. I think you talk about things, but that wasn't what we made this decision based on.
Just wanted to pause there because, as you might have heard, Ron Francis mentioned exit interviews. He is talking about exit interviews were not the final say. So I just want to put that out there, especially given the reporting that we heard from Emily Kaplan. I adore Emily Kaplan. And again, just some of the reports, at least from what we're hearing inside Kraken camp and what we're hearing at national media, they don't quite align. Now, I'm not saying that they're wrong. It's just we're going to have to do a little bit more digging. Anyway, let's hear more from Ron Francis.
Yeah, I don't, I said, like, that's the exit interviews and stuff. I'm watching each and every night, and that's what I'm trying to see whether I think that. I don't think that the players, quit on Dave. I thought even their first season, as tough as that was with COVID and stuff, they continue to work hard for him. Last year was the same thing, and I think this year, same thing. They worked hard for him. We just didn't get the results we wanted to get. Oh, I would hope so. The plan is in our exit meetings. It wasn't good enough this year, and we got to be better starting day one in camp next year. So, that's not why we did it. But I would think if I'm a player, there's some responsibility on my shoulder for sure.
So again, exit interviews per Ron Francis. This came before the reporting from Emily Kaplan. Per Ron Francis, it wasn't just the exit interviews. And again, I said it before when I was like, let's slow our roll on some of the controversies happening. I've said it before. It makes complete sense for the Seattle Kraken to look into whether they want to retain their coaching staff. That didn't bother me. I'm curious and a little bit confused as to how much of this, how much of this was player-led or driven versus was something coming from the front office. I said a couple of episodes ago that I thought that again, like I'm saying right now, if the Seattle Kraken wanted to move on or even reflect on whether they wanted Dave on or not, that made total sense to me. In my opinion, what we saw between the Seattle Kraken giving Dave Hakstol an extension, um, and now today or yesterday, to me, the glaring issues and the changes were made at the front office level. Dave does not construct the roster. Ron Francis and company do. And another thing in that last clip, if you're watching on video, you saw me emote, but Ron also saying, if he was asked about the players and what does getting rid of a head coach signal, or two coaches signal to the players, and he's saying effectively, yeah, if I'm a player, I know that I have to do better. And this season, the effort, I can't even describe how disappointing at times it was to watch the Seattle Kraken play hockey. Not because they were losing, not even because they were ill, but because the effort, the energy, the focus was not there. So although we're hearing that exit interviews didn't have anything to do with that, is it possible that Dave lost the locker room? I think it's very possible, just given how the team was playing. But then I wonder, because players, Ron Francis now multiple times over, and Dave himself all have and me. I have been saying, Dave has said, players multiple times over have said, and Ron has said, there wasn't enough, and that some of this has to come on the players. So whether we like the move or not, whether we think the move for Dave was inevitable or not, whether we think that maybe changes higher up could have been made or not, I'll be honest, it is very, air quotes, normal to have a situation where a team is not functioning the way that they are expected to function, and the players aren't doing their part, the GM isn't doing their part, and yes, the coaching staff isn't getting results, and the first domino to fall is the coach. That is sports. I don't always like it. It's certainly not quote unquote fair, but that's how sports work. But coming up next, I already gave you the Ron Francis quote, so we'll do a deeper dive, including comments from Vince Dunn on a lost locker room. And of course, the big question, what's next? Who's next for the Seattle Kraken as far as their bench boss, or now bosses, are concerned? Today's episode of Locked on Kraken brought to you by our friends at Monopoly Go. Said it at the top of the show, but sometimes your competitiveness gets the best of you. There's a joke about the Seattle Kraken, but I will be good for now. But Monopoly Go is a healthy way to get out some of your competitive juices. It's a mobile twist on a classic. And when you're playing Monopoly, whether with family, with friends, I said yesterday I have the Zelda edition, you're kind of beholden to the game pieces and the game board that you have on your physical copy. Not the case with Monopoly Go. Also, you can team up with people on Monopoly Go. You can also loot your air quote friends on Monopoly Go. So it's just taking the game you love to a complete new level. You can trade unique stickers that are available, complete albums to get prizes. And of course, there's all kinds of different traveling boards and cool new pieces that you can play with. Emojis, it just takes everything, makes it mobile, and makes it more interactive. So, if you want to try something familiar, but also fun and innovative, I highly recommend Monopoly Go. You can download Monopoly Go now for free on Google Play or the App Store. And remember, it's game on. Thanks as always, Seattle hockey fans, for making Locked On Kraken a part of your daily destination. Mentioned this a time or two, but Locked On Kraken, of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. And we want to let you know that in case you missed it, the full Locked On NFL mock draft is available. An ultimate 6-episode series on Locked On NFL Draft to hear who our local experts of Locked On picked for every NFL franchise. Live reactions, local college experts, and even a fantasy football angle. Locked On NFL Mock Draft, available now on Locked On NFL Draft on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. We're talking, of course, about the dismissal of Dave Hakstol and Paul McFarland, two of the head coach and assistant coach of the Seattle Kraken. I'm not in love with this move. I understand it. And I dare I even say I'm leaning toward it being quote unquote necessary. I think we also could have gotten through the first portion of this coming season, and I think we would have known definitively. But there are reports that this had to happen, and it had to happen now because, again, Emily Kaplan from ESPN reporting that the locker room was lost, that Dave lost the locker room. But that's interesting because that's not what we're hearing from Kraken camp. We're hearing the exact opposite, actually. And I want you to hear from the one and only Vince Dunn, who talked about this. He talked about the locker room in his exit interviews, which again are available on the Locked On Kraken YouTube page. And Vince is saying that that's not the case, that never was the locker room lost. He does, though, get into talking about what players need to do. And in fact, says that, at some point in time, what more is there for the coaching staff to do or say if effectively the players aren't going to do what they need to do and get done, no pun intended, what needs to get done. But let's hear what Vince Dunn has to say about this idea, this concept of losing the locker room. Here's Vince Dunn. Again, this is during his exit interview, which of course is available in full if you would like to listen on the Locked On Kraken YouTube page.
Did you feel as the season went on and got later in the year, like the messaging was still resonating in the room, as especially as you guys started to realize that you kind of weren't in the playoffs and all that? Like, how did that kind of land from the coaching staff?
Like, do you mean do we take in their messages? Like, were we listening, taking it in? Yeah, I thought throughout the whole year we responded to what they said the same way throughout the whole year. I think there's only so much a coach can say, realistically, if you want to point fingers around the room. It's easy to do. It ultimately comes down to the guys in the dressing room, and we're the ones out there that need to do what it takes to win. So yeah, I think there's obviously moments in the season where there's tension and between players and everything, with so many distractions and outside noise and so much pressure when, like you said, it's time to push for the playoffs, and the messages are very direct and very intense, but by no means was the dressing room lost. You can go around and ask anybody. Everyone's very friendly with each other and loves each other in the dressing room and respects each other and plays hard for each other. But interviews, Hack said it in interviews, I think we outworked ourselves in some aspects. We didn't work smart. We worked hard every night, but I think strategically and in the system, sometimes we weren't 100% there. So yeah, I don't think you can say it was a message from the coaches that was a problem. You can look at any team that struggles and doesn't make the playoffs, that maybe the coaches lose the dressing room or anything like that. I've been on teams that haven't made playoffs. I've been on championship teams, so I've seen it all. It always comes down to the players in the room.
That's what I've been feeling. I'm not in the locker room, obviously. but it just felt like there was a lack of the ability to really get this team motivated. And yeah, some of that is coaching for sure. And if guys are kind of got it in their mind for whatever reason, including maybe that they have lost faith in the coach, there could be a lot of reasons why people aren't responding. So I never want to be dismissive of what players are saying they need, because that's just not how I operate. I don't know. I don't know what to make. I don't know what to think. Vince is saying we didn't, no one lost the locker room. This is on us. So I don't know. My take is that the Seattle Kraken fan base is kind of all over the place. I don't know that there is a consensus, except that we know that moves needed to be made. This is the first move the franchise decided to make. There's some people that like this. There's some people that are in between, don't necessarily like it, but understand it. And then there's people that don't understand it at all. I'm kind of in between camp 2 and 3, I would say, because again, this doesn't solve for me defensive issues. This doesn't solve for me front office issues. And again, we're going to get to some comments that I think really illuminate that. And it doesn't solve for me whatever funk there was happening in the locker room, or at least from my perspective. If Dave was the problem, in theory, right, we'll find out. But if someone else has trouble with that locker room, if the guys, despite 2 coaching changes, still kind of are mulling around with a funk and can't get themselves motivated, then maybe it wasn't only the coach. The roster as constructed needs some tinkering. I think that's a fact, period, point blank. So, we've got a lot to talk about. It's not going to stop for this episode. This is going to be something that we talk about for the off season. But coming up next on Locked On Kraken, I want to read some of your comments and how the fan base, at least those who interact with us on YouTube, are feeling about the coaching changes. Today's episode of Locked On Kraken brought to you by our friends at FanDuel, who do sometimes have odds on what coaches will be dismissed. I should have pulled that up for today. Anyway, it's playoff time in the NHL, of course, not for the Kraken. And in the NBA, we know baseball's in full swing, and the WNBA also getting started soon as well. Right now, new customers to FanDuel will get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 whether your first bet wins or loses. Bet on everything from slap shots and home runs to slam dunks, all on an app that is safe, secure, and easy to use. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Thanks as always for making Locked On Kraken a part of your daily destination. Locked On Kraken, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Want to remind you that Locked On has launched the first ever national 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube and is now also available on Amazon Fire TV. Hey, Amazon Fire TV viewers, you can find us free in the Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today, now available on the free Fire TV channels app. Erica L. Ayala here, your host of Locked On Kraken, really breaking down the news that Dave Hakstol relieved from his coaching duties, first ever head coach of the Seattle Kraken, out the door, along with one of our assistant coaches. So, of course, the question is kind of who is in the pipeline? We talked about this a little bit the other day, but I want to go first to Sound of Hockey. If you're not familiar with Sound of Hockey, highly recommend. Darren, a colleague, of course, covering the Seattle Kraken, always very kind to me. But if you remember, I on Locked On Kraken talked about some of this, also using some of the reporting from Jeff Baker. But one name that we've heard from the beginning since he took the head coaching job at Coachella Valley is, of course, Dan Bylsma. Disco Dan has had success with our Coachella Valley Firebirds, I talked about how the Firebirds had a rough start to the season as well. But the difference is that the Firebirds were able to turn things around. Is that Dan and his squad, Jessica Campbell? Listen, I'll be honest. When I saw that it was not just Dave, but an assistant coach, that's a vacancy, I'm like, all right, bring up Dan and Jessica. Bring up Dan and Jessica. I like that. That I don't necessarily love that we got rid of Dave at this point in time, how it's gone down. That being said, I could be down for Dave, or excuse me, for Dan and Jessica. Come package deal to the Seattle Kraken. I really like how their hockey minds work. So, I don't know. But I don't know if that's going to happen. But Dan Bilesma, of course, a lot of people have been talking about Rod Brind'Amour from Carolina. A lot of mixed reporting here. Of course, there's a history between Ron and Rod, but how much of that is still good, or are we Taylor Swift style? Is there a little bit of bad blood seeping in there? You know, I think a lot of people have mixed reviews on how Ron Francis himself did in Carolina and what partnerships and friendships and working relationships are still solid, and are there some that have been tethered? Those are just reports. Everyone, again, has their own opinion on that. We're going to have to just see. Jay Woodcroft is a name, aka Woody. Spent his last 3 seasons with the Edmonton Oilers before being let go after just 13 games this season. And so, you know, that was an interesting situation because, I'm seeing what Darren posted here, and the Oilers were in town and played the Kraken right around that time that Woodcroft got let go. Jay Leach, it's a no for me. For Jay Leach, I understand. Darren pointed out, and over the last year and a half, we've heard that Jay Leach, his name has maybe been tossed around for another head coaching job elsewhere. It's a no for me. You know, maybe a lot of people like what he does independent or individually, with defensemen. I've told you time and time again, I do not like our defensive systems. So it's going to be a no for me on Jay Leach. Just what I've seen on how the culture of the defense. I was also asked, and this is a little bit outside of the purview of today's conversation, but I want to note that someone, one of our insiders and everydayers, was like, hey, well, what passes the ELA, my eye test, when it comes to defense? And I spent some time really focusing on the defensive efforts of both Dallas and Vegas last night as they played. And I'm going to answer that question coming up. I don't want to get into it too deep right now. But anyway, all that to say, Jay is a no for me. So, you know, there are a few other names here. Dean Evanson, you know, I'm just really curious to see how this all plays out. The carousel of coaches in the NHL is very disturbing for a number of reasons, including that it's kind of the same guys getting opportunities, and no one can actually quantify what success or arguably even what failure looks like in the NHL. And some of that is because it depends on every situation. But I think also some of the changes that we see in the NHL are a little short-sighted, especially for a league, a game that drafts talent so young and then expects them to compete with nearly 40-year-olds. So, I mean, yeah, it's possible. Those are unicorns in most every other sport. So I don't know. I think it's going to be interesting. But as promised, I wanted to get to some of your comments. Robert Wells, 6724, too early to give up on Hakstol. I think that's I'm like very close to agreeing with you. I think it's a little premature, but not by much. we're really skating that line. And maybe in a year's time, we'll be like, that was the best decision ever. But it is a little odd. Then Michael 21 saying, this was a necessary step, in my opinion. Now, good luck next year, Kraken. And that's the thing. We have to figure out what we're going to do next year. And getting rid of 2 coaches, to me, is not immediately indicative of the Seattle Kraken exactly knowing what is coming down the pipeline and what the vision, what the plan is. And that's a little bit of a problem right now. It's a problem right now. It's not that it's not fixable, but I need to see more moves from the Seattle Kraken for sure. Other comments that we've gotten in the last 24 hours. I would like Dave to get another shot, writes Steven. Is canon, I believe it is. Steven is canon, 4060. Kind of a 1-year probation, or at least half a season, to tweak the system with a better mix of players. Definitely agree with you, Steven, there. A better mix of players. I feel that we did have a better chemistry last year, part of which was the players we let go. I agree, especially with Ryan Donato on that one, Steven. For me, he seems to have a strategic understanding of the game and good communication skills. And those are things actually that Ron says in some of the comments that I shared today, but also in the full comments if you check it out. I really appreciated this. And this was actually from a few days ago, when I was like, wait, Ron, what did Ron Francis say? How does this relate to Dave Hakstol? Cassis fortuitous. I want Francis to remain the GM, but the guy is just trying to make his moves last season look better. Francis, please don't talk about injuries to Berkey or Dunn when you were heavily asked not to put all your eggs in those baskets during the off season. Heck yes, I agree with that. I've said it multiple times. I don't understand what's happening there. So yeah. Some other people saying, and this was from 2 weeks ago. Again, we've been having this conversation about coaching for a while, but I want to mention this. I think it's an interesting comment. It's certainly how a lot of people in Philadelphia feel. Hakstol is terrible handling young players. Every time he has had a choice, he favors the mediocre vet. I don't know that I fully agree, but I understand a little bit more where those comments are coming from, and we're going to keep doing this. These are just a few of the comments that stood out to me. You've had a lot of great comments. Again, it's about, split in 3 buckets, almost equally. People who love the move, couldn't have happened sooner. People who absolutely hate the move, and people who are a little bit in between, including a group of us, where I am included, that think that more of what we saw as the issue in season 3 was a front office issue, and that doesn't change by just letting go of Dave Hakstol. There are other changes that need to be made. But that's our episode. Ron Francis and company, ball is fully in your court. With Dave and Paul out, where do you hide? There's nowhere else to hide. Unless you really botch the next head coach, but then also doesn't that become a bad decision? I also think it's wild that you sign someone to an extension that I guess would have kicked in this coming year, but you don't even get to that extension because you decide to let them go. Like, we have to talk about this. Things just aren't completely adding up and aligning right now. Maybe it'll work out. But right now, it's not feeling great. It's not looking great. I don't know where we go from here. And so we got a lot to talk about this offseason. But make sure that you are staying kind to yourself, staying hydrated also. Make sure you're drinking water. Get those electrolytes in as well. And of course, be kind to one another. Let's hold fast. Let's stay true. We got to get fired up. We got to get ready for playoff hockey on Friday and Saturday between the Firebirds in our AHL affiliate, and of course the Mavericks, our ECHL affiliate. But that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Kraken. I'll catch you on the next one. Erica Ayala, your host, saying peace out, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day.